Welcome to our Revenge History channel. From the outside, William and Laura's life looked flawless. A dream house in the suburbs, a thriving career, two beautiful children, and a love story their friends often envied. To neighbors and colleagues, they seemed untouchable, the kind of couple that had it all figured out. But behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to form in the carefully painted picture. Small details, a late-night text, a sudden guardedness with her phone, unexplained business dinners, began to gnaw at William's instincts. At first, he dismissed them, convincing himself it was stress, that every marriage hit rough patches. But those doubts only grew sharper when promises started breaking. The woman who once swore to stand beside him through every storm became distant, colder, her laughter no longer genuine. William told himself he was overthinking, but deep down, a question haunted him. What if the person he trusted most, the mother of his children, was already planning a future without him? Before we begin, I would really appreciate it if you like this video, you can help me continue to spread the meaningful lesson. If you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like this video, please comment 1. If you don't like it, please comment 0 to let me know so I can make a better video for you. Now, let's get started. William had always believed that the strongest foundations of his life were his marriage and his children. He built his business with late nights and early mornings, grinding away while telling himself it was for them, for the family. To his friends, he seemed to have everything a man could want. A beautiful wife, Laura, 2 kids who lit up his world, and a house in a neighborhood where everyone knew his name. But the thing about foundations is this: they don't collapse all at once. They crack quietly, piece by piece, until one day the entire structure gives way. That was what began to happen in William's home. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that he convinced himself it was nothing. Laura had always been warm, quick to share stories about her day, to laugh at his jokes even when they weren't funny. But then came the small changes. She started staying late at work, explaining that new projects demanded her attention. Her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was suddenly glued to her hand or hidden away in her purse. The playful light in her eyes seemed to fade, replaced by something guarded, something distant. William told himself he was imagining it, that stress was changing her. Every entrepreneur he knew had been warned that marriage could get rocky when careers pulled in different directions. He brushed it aside, not wanting to be the paranoid husband, but the cracks kept widening. He noticed her laughter, when it came, didn't reach her eyes. She seemed distracted even at dinner with the kids. When he reached for her hand, she pulled away under the excuse of being tired. He would wake at night to find the glow of her phone lighting up the room, her face turned away from him. One evening, as he walked in earlier than usual from a meeting, he caught the tail end of a phone call. Her voice low, almost trembling, with words like, "I can't talk now, he's home." When she saw him, she fumbled with her phone and forced a smile too polished to be real. William's gut twisted. He was a man who trusted numbers, contracts, and strategy. But now, instinct told him that something was unraveling. Entrepreneurs pride themselves on spotting patterns, and he couldn't ignore this one. Laura's pattern of distance was not accidental. The confirmation came not with a bang, but with a whisper of digital evidence. One night, Laura left her phone unattended on the counter while tucking the kids into bed. Notifications popped up, small, blinking betrayals on the screen. William didn't want to be that husband, but the truth was already clawing at him. He unlocked it. What he found gutted him. Messages filled with intimacy and longing, words she hadn't spoken to him in years, were sent to another man. There were photos, too, and plans. They weren't just sneaking around for stolen passion. They were discussing a future, one without him. And then came the part that froze his blood, her messages about the children. Laura wasn't just in love with someone else. She was preparing to rip apart the only thing William valued more than his own pride, his bond with his kids. In carefully phrased sentences, she had told her lover that she was working with a lawyer, gathering evidence to prove William was unfit as a father. She wrote about painting him as an absent husband, too consumed by his business, too unstable to raise the kids. The woman he trusted most was building a case to erase him from his children's lives. The betrayal cut deeper than infidelity. Cheating wounds a spouse. Conspiring to take the children annihilates a parent. William sat in the silence of the kitchen that night, phone in hand, unable to breathe as the magnitude of the truth settled over him. She hadn't just broken their vows. She was preparing to destroy him completely. In the following days, he tested her without revealing what he knew. He asked her about work, about why she was distracted, about whether she was happy. Her answers were rehearsed, slippery. She no longer met his eyes. He realized he was speaking to someone who had already left him emotionally, someone who had replaced their life together with a secret fantasy she was nurturing in the shadows. Every detail around the house began to feel like evidence. Her new wardrobe, chosen with a confidence that wasn't for him. Her sudden interest in networking events that never had an address. Her quick temper whenever he asked too many questions. And worst of all, her sudden attentiveness to the children's routines, as if she were rehearsing her role as the sole parent. William knew entrepreneurs often talk about risk management, anticipating threats before they destroy everything you've built. Now he realized that his greatest threat wasn't a competitor in business, but the woman sleeping in the room down the hall. She was preparing a hostile takeover of his family. The final confirmation came when he hired a private investigator. For weeks, he had wrestled with the shame of even considering it. But in the end, truth mattered more than pride. The investigator's photos showed Laura meeting her lover at discreet restaurants, at hotels, at places they thought were hidden. But what struck William most wasn't their intimacy. It was their planning. In one overheard conversation, Laura was heard boasting that she would win full custody, that William's workaholic image would destroy him in court. She was confident, calculating, already envisioning a future where she alone controlled their children's lives and the financial leverage that came with it. For William, the betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was strategic. His wife wasn't acting like a partner who lost her way. She was acting like an opponent preparing for war. He saw in her behavior the same cold determination he once respected in himself as a businessman. And now he knew the battle was not about whether their marriage would survive. That was already dead. The real fight was whether he would allow her to take away the only legacy that mattered, his children. Sitting in his office late one night, staring at the framed photos of his kids, William felt something shift inside him. Anger, grief, disbelief, they all melted into something sharper, resolve. Entrepreneurs learn to play the long game, to plan quietly and strike decisively. If Laura thought she could betray him and strip away his children with lies, she had underestimated him. He wouldn't lash out recklessly. He wouldn't beg. Instead, he would prepare, silently, strategically. The betrayal had been uncovered, and with it, her plan to take everything from him. But William wasn't a man who gave up what was his. He had built an empire from nothing. Now, he would protect the only empire that mattered, his children's future. And he would make sure Laura learned that some betrayals don't end with escape. They end with consequences. William had always believed business negotiations were the toughest battles a man could face. He had gone head-to-head with competitors, wrestled with investors, and fought tooth and nail for contracts that built his company from the ground up. But the day he walked into family court, he realized none of those encounters compared to what awaited him here. This wasn't about money or market share. It was about blood, about legacy, about the right to be a father. The courtroom became an arena, not of strategy decks and financial forecasts, but of human lives hanging in the scales of justice. The air was sharp with tension. The cold wood benches, the sterile white lights, and the silence that hung heavy before the proceedings made every sound echo like a gunshot. Laura sat across the room, poised, her lawyer whispering into her ear like a general giving last-minute instructions before battle. She didn't glance at William. Her eyes, once familiar, now carried the same look he'd seen in boardroom adversaries. Cold, calculating, convinced she would win. Their children, mercifully shielded from the spectacle, were absent. But their absence was a wound William carried like a weight on his chest. The first round began with Laura's attorney painting William as the archetype of the absent father. He was described as a man consumed by work, too obsessed with his company to attend soccer games, recitals, or even bedtime routines. Each statement was delivered with surgical precision, designed to carve out the image of a man unfit for custody. William sat stone-faced, though inside he burned. He wanted to shout that he had built his business for his family, that every sleepless night, every deal closed, every mile traveled was so his children could live securely. But he knew outbursts wouldn't win this war. Discipline was his weapon now. Then came Laura's testimony. She spoke with rehearsed sorrow, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. She told the court William was distant, temperamental, and unreliable. She recounted half-truths, fragments of arguments twisted into stories of neglect. At moments, she even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the victim. For those watching, she seemed a picture of a mother fighting selflessly for her children's well-being. But what Laura didn't expect was that William had prepared his case like he prepared every business deal. Quietly, thoroughly, leaving no stone unturned. When his attorney rose to speak, the energy in the room shifted. Calm and precise, his lawyer began dismantling Laura's narrative with facts and evidence. The first strike came with calendars and digital records. Every missed soccer game she mentioned was countered with proof. Travel itineraries showing William had flown in just to attend, photos of him on the sidelines cheering, and text messages from Laura herself thanking him for being there. Every recital she claimed he skipped was refuted by videos, time-stamped, showing him in the audience clapping. The image of an absent father began to fracture. Then came financial records. While Laura had accused William of being selfishly devoted to his career, evidence showed he had consistently prioritized his family. Tuition paid in advance, medical bills covered without hesitation, even a college fund set aside years earlier. Each receipt was a testimony not of neglect, but of devotion. The narrative shifted further, each exhibit exposing Laura's claims as exaggerated, if not outright false. But the true turning point came when unexpected evidence was introduced. William's lawyer requested permission to present findings from a private investigator. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as photographs and transcripts were laid out. They revealed not just Laura's affair, but also her candid words about her strategy to portray William as unfit. There she was captured in her own voice, telling her lover how she planned to use his workaholic image against him, how she could make him look like he doesn't care about the kids. It was no longer just a custody case. It was proof of calculated deception. The judge leaned forward, studying the evidence carefully. Laura's composure cracked for the first time. Her hand shook as she gripped her water glass. Her lawyer objected, scrambling to frame the revelations as irrelevant to parental capability. But the damage was done. For a case that had hinged on credibility, her credibility was evaporating in real time. William remained steady. Inside, waves of anger and betrayal surged, but he held to the discipline that had carried him this far. He understood that victory wasn't about emotional outbursts, but about persistence, precision, and patience. In that moment, he thought of the entrepreneurs he mentored, how he had always told them, "In business, you don't win by shouting the loudest. You win by being the most prepared." Now, in this courtroom, those words were no longer theory. They were surviving. As the hearing pressed on, the judge began addressing Laura directly. Questions cut through her earlier testimony. Why had she omitted details contradicted by documented evidence? Why had she misrepresented William's presence in his children's lives? And, most damningly, what explanation could she give for her own recorded words about manipulating the custody case? Laura faltered. Her answers grew tangled, inconsistent. Her carefully polished image began to unravel before everyone's eyes. The unmasking was brutal, not through theatrics, but through truth. Layer by layer, the lies she had wrapped around herself peeled away. The courtroom no longer saw her as the noble mother fighting for her children. They saw her as a strategist willing to weaponize deception. And in the quiet glances from the judge, William sensed the tide turning. By the time closing arguments were made, the battlefield looked different. Laura's accusations had lost their sharpness, her narrative reduced to fragments. William's defense, built on patience and evidence, stood firm. The judge adjourned with a promise to deliberate, but in that pause, William knew something had shifted irrevocably. Walking out of the courtroom that day, William felt no triumph. What victory could there be in fighting the mother of his children? Yet there was also a sense of vindication, a belief that truth, though sometimes slow, had a way of cutting through lies. He understood now that this wasn't just a custody battle. It was psychological warfare, fought with the weapons of credibility, discipline, and resolve. And though the scars would remain, he had proven one thing. He would not be erased from his children's lives. For men and women who build their lives on resilience, entrepreneurs, creators, dreamers, this was a reminder that the greatest tests don't come in boardrooms or balance sheets. They come in courtrooms, where your legacy as a parent is weighed. William had entered as a man accused of absence. He left as a father whose presence was undeniable, and as a fighter who understood that revenge wasn't loud. It was silent, patient, and devastatingly effective when the truth finally spoke. William had learned long ago that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most powerful. In business, he had seen men pound their fists on the table, raise their voices, and throw threats around like cheap poker chips. Yet, it was always the one who spoke least, who listened most, and who let silence hang heavy before striking. The one who truly controlled the deal. Now, standing in the ruins of his marriage, William knew he had to channel that same discipline. If Laura wanted war, he would not give her fireworks. He would give her silence, sharp, deliberate, and lethal. After the first custody hearing, the temptation to erupt had been overwhelming. To confront her, to call her every name his rage could summon. But William had something greater at stake than dignity. He had his children. So he swallowed every outburst, every bitter word, and began a plot. Entrepreneurs are wired to solve problems, and William treated this betrayal like the most dangerous negotiation of his life. He would create a strategy so precise that Laura would never see it coming until it was too late. His quiet strategy began at home. He deliberately stopped engaging in the heated arguments Laura tried to provoke. When she threw accusations at him, he responded with calm indifference. When she rolled her eyes, mocked his work, or slammed doors, he gave her nothing. Silence unnerved her more than shouting ever could. She expected explosions. Instead, she faced a wall of composure. In the quiet of those moments, William was gathering information, building leverage. Every hostile text she sent, every lie she uttered, every manipulation, he documented it all. He no longer reacted emotionally. He reacted strategically. At night, when the house was still, he worked on his case with the same discipline he once used to scale his company. He pored over financial statements, custody laws, and case precedents. He built a network of advisors, a sharp divorce attorney who knew the system inside and out, a private investigator who could capture Laura's missteps, and even a child psychologist who could attest to William's role in his children's lives. Quietly, brick by brick, he built a fortress. Laura mistook his silence for weakness. She flaunted her confidence, telling friends and even their children that things would soon be different. She believed she had already won, that William was too passive, too consumed by work to fight back. But in truth, he was letting her believe in her victory, because overconfidence was her greatest weakness. The legal trap was prepared in the shadows of her arrogance. William's lawyer filed motions that seemed procedural, but were in fact carefully timed snares. Each one asked for accountability, disclosure of assets, evidence of caregiving schedules, verification of household expenses. On the surface, it looked like routine paperwork. In reality, it forced Laura to commit her lies to legal documents, lies that could be dismantled later with proof. The investigators' reports grew thicker by the week. Photos of Laura with her lover. At times, she claimed to be with the children. Receipts from trips funded with money William had earned, used for nights in hotels that Laura swore were business conferences. Even voice recordings of her making comments about taking William for everything he's worth. These weren't just betrayals of love. They were betrayals of law, of trust, of credibility in court. Meanwhile, William strengthened his presence as a father. He volunteered at the kids' school, coached weekend soccer games, and created a predictable, stable routine at his home. He didn't do this for appearances. He did it because it mattered. But he also knew that when the time came, every witness, from teachers to neighbors, would testify not about a man unraveling, but about a man deeply rooted in his children's lives. And then came the moment of counterattack. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was a surgical strike. The second custody hearing began much like the first, with Laura's attorney pushing the narrative of William as detached, unreliable, and unfit. But when it was their turn, William's lawyer rose and began presenting the evidence collected in silence. One by one, Laura's lies unraveled. She had sworn she spent weekends caring for the children, yet photos and receipts placed her in hotel rooms with her lover. She had accused William of being financially reckless, yet records showed she had siphoned thousands from their joint accounts for personal indulgences. She had portrayed herself as the stable parent, yet recordings revealed her mocking the very system she was trying to manipulate. The courtroom shifted. The sympathy Laura had carefully manufactured drained away as the truth emerged. Her confidence faltered. Her rehearsed tears dried up. She stammered, contradicted herself, and watched helplessly as the credibility she had built collapsed in front of the judge. William did not gloat. He didn't smirk or throw triumphant glances. He sat silently, his hands folded, his expression calm. To the outside world, it looked as though the revelations didn't rattle him. But inside, he felt the weight of every sleepless night, every silent hour of planning, every sacrifice. This was not a victory for vanity. It was protection for his children. His revenge was not loud. It was measured, undeniable, written into the very legal fabric of the case. When the hearing ended, Laura walked out diminished, her lawyer shaken, her narrative destroyed. William walked out steady, not because the pain had vanished, it never would, but because he had reclaimed control. Revenge had not come from screaming, from chaos, or from bitterness. It had come from patience, from silence, from letting the truth speak louder than any accusation she could manufacture. For men and women who live in the arena of business, who understand that real power is built quietly, this was a lesson embodied in flesh and blood. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a weapon. And when wielded with precision, it can dismantle even the most calculated betrayal. William's silent revenge wasn't about humiliating Laura. It was about making sure she could never again threaten to erase him from his children's lives. It was about showing that when you betray someone who has built their life on strategy, resilience, and foresight, you invite a counterattack that you will never see coming until it's too late. The ruling came on a gray morning that looked like it had been ordered to match the mood. William sat at the counsel table, hands folded, jaw steady, while the judge read through the findings. No theatrics, no gavel slam for television, just measured sentences that would redraw the map of his life. The court found that Laura had misrepresented key facts, diverted joint funds for personal use, and attempted to manipulate the narrative of William's involvement as a father. The judge's language was careful. Family court always is, but the substance was clear. The children's stability mattered more than anyone's ego. Primary physical custody to William. Joint legal custody for now, with a review in 6 months, contingent on co-parenting behavior and compliance with the court's orders. A parenting schedule that gave Laura regular time, but put guardrails around transitions. Reimbursement for the marital funds she'd siphon off for hotels and work trips. Mandatory co-parenting classes for both, and a parenting coordinator assigned to keep the temperature from boiling over. There was no victory parade. Family court doesn't grant those, but there was air in William's lungs again. He could breathe without the fear of being erased. He glanced at Laura, her face held together until the judge moved on to the financial terms. That's when it cracked. She had expected to win the children and, with them, the leverage that so often dictates everything else. Instead, the court was ordering her to account for every dollar that had gone missing while she was photographing new beginnings in hotel mirrors. Her attorney placed a hand on her forearm. She pulled it away and stared at the floor like it might open and swallow her whole. The hallway outside the courtroom was a corridor of lowered voices and tight smiles. Lawyers offering practical next steps. Clients are trying to remember how to walk into the rest of their lives. Laura stood alone by a window, her phone face down in her palm, her shoulders drawn in. For the first time since this began, she looked small. Not the rehearsed fragility she used on the stand, but the kind that comes when you realize an illusion won't carry you any farther. William didn't approach. There was nothing left to say. Silence, the same silence that had been his weapon, was now also his boundary. Life didn't transform in a day, but the center shifted. The first evening the children came home under the new schedule, the house felt more like a home than a trench. William cooked simple food, pasta, sautéed vegetables, and a salad the kids helped toss. Ordinary things became sacred. Homework at the dining table, a soccer ball kicked across the backyard at dusk, a bedtime story read without checking the clock. He set alarms not just for meetings, but for reminders to close the laptop and listen. The company he built could survive without him for an hour. His children could not always wait. Kids sense the weather long before adults admit there's a storm. They had watched the temperature rise and fall in rooms where they were told everything was fine. Now they tested the air. They asked practical questions at first. Who's picking us up Thursday? Where's the red cleat? And then the harder ones in fragments only children can craft. Are we still a family? Do we have to choose? William answered with the only truth that mattered. You do not have to choose. You're not a prize. You're my life. And your mom will always be your mom. We're going to treat each other with respect. The day Laura broke down came 2 weeks later, a neutral drop-off point the parenting coordinator had selected. She arrived late, harried, sunglasses on, voice brittle. The kids climbed in her car and realized a favorite backpack hadn't made the transition. It was nothing in the scheme of things, a bag with a patch they'd sewn on with William one Saturday. But in that moment, it became everything. Laura's frustration flashed, and then collapsed into tears she couldn't stop. The facade fell away. She wasn't a strategist or an adversary. She was a mother who had just discovered that control is not the same as love, and that love cannot be compelled by winning. William didn't speak. He found the backpack in his trunk. He'd started keeping duplicates of essentials for exactly this reason, and handed it to the kids with a smile. "You're good," he said softly to Laura, not as a truce, not as absolution, but as a lifeline tossed across choppy water. She nodded once and drove off. Consequences like interest compound quietly. Laura's lover stopped appearing as the reality grew less cinematic. Court orders, accountability, schedules that didn't flex around secret dinners. Friends who had cheered her bravado drifted when the story didn't end in triumph. At work, HR asked for explanations about expenses that didn't match project budgets. Nothing dramatic. No public firing. No scandals splashed across social media. Just a steady erosion of the storyline she had sold herself. The cost of betrayal rarely posts a receipt in one line. It spreads across a life until you can't tell where one loss ends and the next begins. William didn't celebrate her unraveling. Revenge had never been about humiliation. It had been about protection and truth. Still, there was a private reckoning he allowed himself late at night, after dishes were done and the house went quiet. He thought about the early days of their marriage, the vows spoken in a voice that believed time would honor them. He thought about the moment he unlocked her phone and watched the life he knew dissolve in a trail of words. He thought about the courtroom, about the photographs he had sat on without shouting, about the patience it took to let the truth walk instead of forcing it to run. He had learned that the most devastating counterpunch is often the life you build so well that the person who tried to destroy you becomes a footnote. The children's choice didn't come in a declaration. There was no dramatic speech delivered in chambers. It showed up in smaller ways that mattered more. It was the daughter who asked to keep her soccer cleats at Dad's because they always end up here anyway. It was the son who wanted his science fair project stored in William's garage because we have space and we won't forget it there. It was the text from their teacher praising how the kids were settling and how William always answered emails the same day. It was bedtime a week after the ruling when both children fell asleep on the couch halfway through a movie, and William carried them, one by one, to their beds, pausing in each doorway the way fathers do to memorize the rise and fall of a chess that proves you've done at least one thing right. There were setbacks because life insists on them. A miscommunication about a pickup time, a tense exchange about holiday plans, an email from Laura dripping with old heat. In those moments, William returned to the discipline that saved him. Pause before reply, document instead of accuse, ask the parenting coordinator to step in when pride wanted to take the wheel. He learned to choose battles not based on being right, but based on what served the children. That, more than any court order, kept the path from crumbling underfoot. In quieter hours, he reviewed finances with the same rigor he brought to the courtroom. He closed share credit lines he should have closed years ago. He set up automatic transfers to the kids' college funds. He updated beneficiaries and built a living trust, not as a fortress against an enemy, but as a promise to the people who count on him. He put his company on a healthier cadence, delegating decisions that didn't need his signature, carving out real time that could not be bought back at any price. In a different season of life, these would have felt like business moves. Now, they were acts of fatherhood. Laura kept her time. Some weeks went smoothly, others didn't. She attended the co-parenting class and surprised everyone by taking it seriously. She showed up more consistently, said less that stung. Perhaps it was the shock wearing off. Perhaps it was the way two lives, once fused, begin to harden into separate shapes that can be held without breaking. William didn't speculate. He focused on what he could control: their home's rhythm, the children's safety, the steady humility of a man who knows that winning in family court is just the permission to keep doing the work. On a Saturday afternoon in early spring, the kids were in a yard orchestrating a chaotic game that had no rules beyond laughter. William stood on the deck with a mug of coffee that had gone cold without his noticing. He thought about the distance between the man who had once believed that love alone secured a future and the man who now understood that love requires structure, patience, and sometimes silent steel. The heavy cost of betrayal was real. It would echo for years in calendars and pickups and the shape of holidays. But it had purchased something too: clarity about who he was and what he was willing to defend without raising his voice. When the kids barreled back inside, breathless and loud, William warmed the coffee and let it sit again. The house wasn't quiet anymore. It was alive. And in that humble, ordinary noise, he heard the only verdict that mattered. The war had ended without victory flags, and that was fine. He didn't need flags. He had a future, messy, honest, and his. When the storm finally passed, William found himself sitting in the quiet of his living room, a cup of tea cooling in his hands. The house no longer echoed with arguments or rehearsed lies. It carried only the soft rhythm of his children breathing in their sleep upstairs. He looked around at the ordinary things, the toys scattered across the floor, the half-finished homework on the table, and felt a bittersweet calm. The cost of betrayal had been heavy, but in that silence, he recognized what had been saved: his role as a father, his bond with his children, and the strength he had found in refusing to fight fire with fire. The bitter lesson was simple but profound. Betrayal doesn't just break hearts, it tests character. William had learned that sometimes the loudest rage burns out quickly, while silence, when paired with strategy and patience, can reshape the battlefield. His revenge was never about humiliation. It was about ensuring truth had the final word. And in the end, silence became his sharpest weapon. Now, I want to turn this reflection to you. Do you believe silence is the most powerful form of revenge in marriage or in life itself? What lesson have you taken from William's journey? And what one thing will you apply to your own life moving forward? Leave your thoughts below, and let's continue this conversation together. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.